Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 140 with Rookes. I had a great chat with Rookes and we talked about so many things, including pivoting from artist to producer during the pandemic, remixing, being upfront and transparent with the artists she works with, budgeting with artists, forming the 2% Rising network, the importance of having an abundance mindset in the music industry, why it's important to be open to collaboration and different workflows, how she works on productions with artists, programming drums, finding inspiration for your art by going out and seeing other works of art, and everything in between. So I think you'll love this conversation. So here's my chat with Rookes coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone, if you're anything like me, you often find yourself looking for business insight in podcasts. And I'm sure many of you are also into meditation and reflection to help better understand yourself. Former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, decided to launch a podcast that brings these two elements together. It's a series of guided self-reflection exercises, but specifically for freelance creatives like you and me, focusing on the struggles we face as we try to grow our businesses, while also finding more happiness in the work that we do. It's called Thanks for Thinking. It's definitely an unusual format, but if you want to grow your self-awareness, find deeper career satisfaction, and make more money, then I think this podcast might be for you. Experience it for yourself and click the link in the show notes below. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Rookes. Rookes is a genre-fluid writer-producer from Birmingham, now based in London's 1087 Studios. She is also the co-founder of women and gender minority studio talent network 2% Rising, and recent graduate of the 2020 MPG Production Scholarship, and recipient of the Help Musicians UK Do It Differently grant. Former guest of the show, Katie Tavini, recommended I reach out to Rookes, and I finally invited her onto the show, and she's graciously agreed to do so. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Rookes.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolute pleasure. So tell the audience a little bit about your story. I know you've been an artist, you've become sort of a producer, or you've become a producer.
Have become a producer. It's happened.
You've become a producer. Exactly, it's happened. So we could go back even earlier, like about music, just entering your life and the whole shebang.
Oh man.
Tell us a little bit about your story.
Cool. Okay. So I'd been sort of dabbling in the music industry as an artist and in bands off and on since university. And then I started my solo project called Rookes. We started recording in 2014. I think that's when I started writing properly the first EP I made. I was doing that all the way up to the pandemic starting in March 2020. And I was always co-producing my my records with one of my key collaborators as an artist who's called Ben Parker, who's a phenomenal producer and artist himself, and also producing sometimes with another artist pal of his called Jimmy Sims. We made my first two EPs together, kind of as a 3-person team, which I think is really the way it should be a lot of the time, especially because, and I sort of claimed co-producer within that because I was bringing demos that were developed quite far along the line, like quite a high standard in comparison to what they were used to. So we ended up building on the demos as a foundational thing and often taking the stems from those demos straight into the final track. So it was one of these things that we were like, oh yeah, I guess I produced that. And, I was starting to encounter more people who were encouraging me to claim what I was doing because, it can be easy as it's a trend that women in the music industry are discredited a lot. So I was encouraged by Ben and Jimmy and another friend of mine called Kim, who is an artist and producer called Lanta, to start claiming my work. And I did. And so I was sort of moving in that direction already. And I was very conscious that the writing and production part of the record making was my favorite bit. And wasn't that keen on touring, to be honest. It's boring when you're just riding trains on your own and, fighting with sound engineers often in various venues up and down the country. And staying in, cheap Airbnbs. And, you do it because often, I mean, I love the performance element, but everything that sort of surrounded tour culture was not my favorite. And that became apparent when my tour got cut short in the middle of the pandemic and I lost all my income. And
Wow.
the ironic part of that whole situation was that I was only able to claim support from the government because I had lost all my savings in the tour, which I planned to recoup in the second half. And
wow.
And so because I had no savings, I was eligible, which was odd in the extreme. But also I was then in this position where I having canceled the tour, I was sad that I wouldn't be able to go and perform for people. But in terms of all the stuff around it, I felt a little bit of relief.
It was like you were liberated.
Weirdly, yeah. And like the pandemic has been hell on earth for so many people and at times including myself. Sure. But this has been an odd sort of silver lining that I felt like I learned something about myself and the fact that I'd been touring I've been playing gigs for a long time. I realized I'd probably had enough. And I'm going to gig a bit more, but I didn't want it to be the thing that I was doing all the time. That really got me to thinking. And my manager at the time and we discussed it. And we decided that seeing as everyone was trapped inside, that I would start leaning into production. And so my way of doing that at the time was I'd already started writing and recording my first full-length album. And I was going to continue doing that anyway. So we were like, okay, let's just start tapping into that. So I basically had started to make a YouTube series to run alongside the album to show people how I was making it, especially because I wanted to learn how to make a full length, but I didn't want anybody else's work to be at risk, seeing as this was very much a DIY learning on the job project. And I had come into production through a non-traditional route. Like I hadn't been a runner in studio, running and getting tea for everyone for 2 years. Like I hadn't been watching, desks since I was internship age. Well, having said that, you can get an internship at any age these days, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm self-taught just because I couldn't get an internship anywhere.
Right?
I was looking.
Yeah, you find ways.
Didn't happen.
You find ways to make it work. And so I was in this position where I was like, I want to learn to make a full-length record. I feel like I can probably just get on with it. And so I did. And actually, even though that YouTube series wasn't very successful, it became a point of reference for people to see what I was doing. So we then started applying for various grants and other things to try and keep Rookes as a project afloat. And through the YouTube series and starting to put that record together, which is being mixed at the moment, it'll be out later in the year.
Oh, amazing.
We got a grant from Help Musicians to make the record and to distribute it independently, if that's what we decided to do. And I won the Music Producers Guild, which is a thing that I should explain a little bit. It's basically the main trade union in the UK for producers and studio engineers. They started, I don't know if they've done it this year, but they might be doing it next year. They basically put a thing out where they were offering a scholarship for someone to study creative music production with one of the larger music kind of colleges in London, which is ICMP, which is the Institute for Contemporary Music Performance. And I found out that I got both of those things in very short succession to each other. And I also had picked up some part-time work in music tech, which has been a sideline for me for a few years. And I stopped for a while I'd gone on tour for this record. And then I was like, well, I'm not on tour anymore and I've lost all my income. So I guess I'll start applying for music tech jobs. And I got one relatively quickly. So that all kind of clustered together in the autumn of 2020. Within a few days of each other, I found out I got all these things, which was very strange because I was literally celebrating in a room by myself. Like, yay. Right. This is like
just like Bo Burnham's Inside or something.
Oh yeah, that was a vibe at that time.
Yeah, that was crazy.
Like you with like a little cupcake being like, hooray.
Yeah, exactly.
I got some big professional wins and I can't go out for a drink. And that was fine. Like ultimately I was more than happy to follow government guidelines because we were all trying to do our bit. But it was a very surreal way to achieve big things and then not be able to like shout. Well, I shouted about them on the internet, but just not really knowing how to feel in terms of success.
It's not the same thing.
No.
Yeah.
But also being very aware that at that time, though, a lot of people were in pain. There were a lot of people who were ill and dying. And some of them were, I didn't lose anyone kind of close to me, but I did lose a few people. And I didn't want to be that person who was bragging on the internet about their career wins. So I was trying to be sensitive and be like, tiny, yay, and then like withdrawing back into my room and being like, I guess I'll crack on with the grant and the scholarship and the job.
It's so weird, the internet and the content. It's like I keep thinking about like Ukraine these days because obviously who's not thinking about Ukraine?
Of course.
And I literally played in Ukraine and in Russia, and I'm like, should I post something? But then it just looks like I'm just like signaling my virtue or something. Like I'm not doing anything. Like that's not actually helpful.
100%.
I'm just helping myself, but I am feeling this and I'm thinking about this. And so you're just like, should I post this? Maybe it'll help some humanitarian aid happen, or maybe it just won't do anything and I'm just serving myself. I
think that's really good though. Often my guideline is that if I feel like I'm just adding to the noise, like it's like if you're adding to the noise, turn off this song. It's like I'm not going to just throw another fit story up when it's not going to help the situation. There are other ways to do it. But so it is. It was an odd time to be doing well. And then basically during that interim, when I was making my record and I was doing music technology work, I was conscious that I was getting better. And so I started looking around and talking to some artists on the internet about maybe producing something for them, like a track here and there. And I made contact with a couple of artists that I'm working with now. And I started to develop stuff for them. Again, like very slowly, things started to change. And I parted company with my manager at that time, just because that was the right move for both of us. And then a bit later, I was very conscious that I'd suddenly got all these things that I now had to organize, like the study and the grant and the work. And I was really like, I didn't plan to do all of this by myself. And this is suddenly like a much higher profile that I'm getting quite quickly as a producer. Like the Music Producers Guild in particular, their support has been wonderful, like outrageous towards my career. And that's I was awesome. Connecting with, Olga Fitzroy has been one of my biggest supporters, and I'm just overwhelmed. And she's done and continues to do some of the most incredible work at Air. And
she's inspiring.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. And she's so down to earth and kind as well. And I met her face to face for the first time at the MPG Christmas party just gone. And it was so delightful. We basically just had like a tiny moment of, hi.
Yeah.
We've been talking on the phone off and on for 2 years. How exciting. And so the MPG's impact on my career has been enormous, and it really raised my profile exponentially in a way that I had never really had access to as an artist. And that's the reality. Like, artist market is oversaturated. Women are still wildly underrepresented because we're not being signed because sexism. And so I suddenly was getting all this elevation, and I was like, I don't want to do this on my own. That's the reason I didn't like touring, and I don't like doing it on my own now. So I started having dialogue with managers to decide how I wanted to move forward. And then I ended up meeting through those dialogues the manager that I work with now, and who's called Kat, and she's excellent. So then I was just charging ahead. And
I just want to stop you for a second, because that's awesome that you had that insight to kind of like just be like, no, I don't want to do this by myself. I did touring all by myself. So many of us, so many of us producers just spend, forever in a man or woman cave, or
I mean, I am in my cave now, but I share it with two other delightful folks, so that's like the way I get around it, partly because I couldn't afford to be here if we weren't sharing, because it's very expensive to be in this complex. But not very expensive, they're going to slap my wrist for saying that. It's affordable if you're in a certain point in your career, but we make it work, the three of us, because we're all early career, and that's fine. 2021 was kind of a blur. What happened was I was just going through this cycle of like producing, studying, working, producing, studying, working, producing, studying, working. And then, and along the way, I just started to do a few quite significant things. One was that I started looking at remixing and doing more remixing for people.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Seems like you're doing a lot of remixing, and you